Recording now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another ASNEN webinar. It's a great joy to be able to present a couple of speakers to you today with a slightly different angle to what we usually have. A young girl called Beth, who had a stroke at the tender age of 19 with her mother, who's a nurse, and they live in Western Australia. So they will bring their perspective of things, and we will want it to be interactive. So you must ask questions. You know that program that says you can't ask that? Well, yes, you can. So please do, because our hearts go out to people when they're in our beds and they're young, and you think, what is going on? How are they feeling? And often they're in and out very quickly. So please do ask your questions. Do it via the chat. Stacey will go through things, and at the end of the presentation, the Stroke Foundation will put up a few slides and just talk through their Young Stroke project and how they can help support people, so that we're all striving towards the same thing. So I'll hand over to Stacey now, just for the bit of housekeeping, so you know what to do, and get ready with those questions. And thank you and welcome to Beth and Nicola.
Thanks, Lizzie. So as you all have noted, to keep background noise to a minimum, all attendees have been placed on mute. As Lizzie said, we wanted to keep it interactive as possible, so use the Q&A panel to ask questions at any time and ask lots of them. There is also the chat function at the bottom too, where you can comment and chat amongst yourselves. This event is going to be recorded by the ASNEN group today and will be available for future viewing on their website. Also, if you have any feedback, get in contact with the ASNEN group, or if you have any further questions that you may have missed out on throughout the webinar. So with that said, I will hand over to Nicola and Beth to start.
Hi everyone, so I'm Beth. I think I'll start. So I am 21 years old now, and I'm actually in my third year nursing as well. So I had my stroke in August of 2019. I was 19 years old. I was in kind of my second year of uni, kind of first year. I'd moved around a bit, so I was just really getting into things. And just on a normal day, I'd been to uni that day. I had assessments the next day. I was in bed about 10:30 at night, and I was just sending a few text messages before going to sleep. And all of a sudden, I couldn't type anymore. I was just typing gibberish pretty much. I knew what I was writing was wrong, but I just couldn't correct it. So obviously started freaking out a little bit, took a second, tried again, and then went, this isn't right. Got up, turned my light on, and decided to say a few words out to myself, because in my brain I was like, well, if I can't type, then like what else is wrong with me? I think I tried to say something like, I need to go downstairs, and I said I need to catch the bus, or I need to pet the cat, or I was just saying completely wrong sentences, but I did know what I was saying was wrong, but for the life of me I couldn't correct it. So obviously the panic completely set in. I pretty much ran downstairs to my family, and I wasn't experiencing any other of the typical signs of stroke. So for me, the only thing that was affected at that point and throughout my whole journey was my speech. It wasn't slurred. It was just the processing of me getting my words out, and the things I was saying was just completely wrong. So came downstairs. Mum and Dad obviously knew straight away something was wrong, so called the ambulance. And at that point, they made me do the stroke test, asked about the FAST steps, so the face, arms, speech, and time. Asked me to say a little saying that everyone knows, like the early bird catches the worm, I think it was, and I couldn't even get a word out. So I was taken to Fiona Stanley Hospital, and I was put in the waiting room. At that point, my speech was slowly kind of getting a bit better, but still just not quite right. Mum was with me, thank God, because felt a bit better when things started going back to normal, that I was supported. My typing on my phone got a little bit better, and then it just went downhill again. I just remember turning to mum and just being like, I can't, I was trying to talk. So I was admitted and I was in hospital for about a week and a half. My speech actually came back pretty much to normal after about 15 hours. I wasn't experiencing any pain when it was happening or anything huge, apart from just a really heavy feeling in my head, which was also kind of scary because I was like, I'm okay, but it's just my speech. So I spent a lot of time having scans and tests, and they were testing my heart, and eventually came to the conclusion that the reason that I had my stroke was because a hole in my heart was found, that I didn't know I had and was suspected to be there since birth, which is apparently quite common. I was kind of told by accident that I had a stroke. Someone kind of just walked into the room day 2 and was like, oh, so you've had your stroke. And I just remember being like, what, stroke? I did, no one had said that word yet. And then everyone walks in later that day, or like 11 people filling my room, just telling me and dropping this news that I'd had a stroke. And from then on, I was just confused. You'd never really think, being like a healthy uni student, that something like that's going to happen. And the whole time I was in hospital, everyone was just as surprised as I was. There were health professionals kind of being like, wow, you're young. Porters taking me to scans, oh my goodness, you're young. Same thing when I got to the scans. So having everyone just as shocked as I was really, really scary. And yeah, the whole experience of being in hospital was just terrifying. I still don't really remember a lot of it because I was a bit out of it. I was very tired. I was taking it all in. And I think that one of the big things that stood out to me throughout that whole experience is that I didn't really know what was going to happen at any point in that process. I didn't know what was going to happen when I was going to be discharged. When I was discharged, I felt that I was just being ticked off and sent home. I did eventually have surgery to close the hole in my heart on my 20th birthday in November, which was a few months later. But that whole between stage, I had no idea what was going on, and I was constantly being handled off to, oh, well, I was like, can I go out? Can I see my friends? Can I exercise? Can I go to this party in a few weeks' time? Can I go back to uni? And, everyone was kind of like, oh, well, ask your OT, ask the cardiologist. No, I asked neuro. Everyone was kind of just discharging me off to each person. So that was extremely hard for me. I kind of had to figure things out on my own. I eventually, when I was discharged, I was seen by an OT who was amazing at Freo Hospital. But for me, at that point, and even now, the only side effects I really have from the stroke is chronic fatigue, and I get headaches quite a lot and migraines, which I never got before my stroke. So the effects that I have from my stroke are not kind of the typical effects that others may face. I'm very lucky in the sense that I don't have physical effects that kind of hinder me today. And I think the other thing that I have found to be really important when talking about my stroke is the awareness of, I guess, when I was in hospital, I was on an acute neuro ward. So everyone was running around, and I was a very well patient in the eyes of everyone else. And I had my support of my family there, which was amazing. But I was terrified, and I was also struggling with mental health earlier in that year that I considered was managed, and it was, but I was given my medication, and no one really asked me at any point, is it still managed? How are you feeling having this life-altering event? Which all I've been taught throughout uni as a student nurse has been treating the patient holistically, you know, taking time to talk to the patient, to, even if you have a spare minute, just to go and just ask them if they're okay, even if you don't know how to talk to them after that, you know, just seeing if they're okay and not taking things on surface value just because I did seem like I was doing well. I was walking around and I was, you know, I had my family visiting me and spending time with me. So I think that was one thing that didn't sit well with me. And I understood at the time, being a student nurse, that, oh, they're all slammed. They've got, you know, there's patients here that need the nurses and the staff more than that, like I do. And I've got my family, so I guess I'm lucky. But there were times where I was right outside the nursing station and I could just hear them chatting about their weekends, just standing outside my room, you know, probably just having a moment break. But that was the times at night where I was feeling it the most and I was terrified. And yeah, it was just little things that stood out for me. I could talk for a long time about the things that I went through and how I feel after, but I think that working with the Stroke Foundation has really helped me with the process of being home. I found them a little bit later and got into things and decided that I wanted to help people who were going through similar experiences, because at that point in time I didn't really have anyone to talk to. I felt like I was the only person in the world that was 19 and having a stroke, which isn't right. And when I got home, I was a bit lost. All I wanted to do was get back to uni, and I kind of just had to figure that out myself. I did manage to, and I'm, you know, graduating at the end of this year, but the time of being home was a little bit of a mystery. And I think that it's really important that when discharging patients, you know, you have a bit of a process, you try and get ticked off and send them home. But yeah, I didn't really have much guidance when I was home, but the Stroke Foundation has really given me a purpose, and they do some amazing things that I kind of wish I knew about a bit more when I was fresh out of hospital. And we got, you know, you get given a pack that's got pictures of old people in wheelchairs being discharged back to the community or care homes, and you just don't even want to look at that when you're in hospital as a 19-year-old. So yeah, I could I could ramble on for a while, but I will probably leave it at that. And I, like was said before, I am open to absolutely any question, even if you think it might be a bit, you know, out of limits. It's nothing's off limits for me. So I will pass on to Mum now, because she'll probably pick up on things that I have missed or skipped over or but yeah, this is Mum and she's been amazing through the whole process. So I'll pass on now.
Hi everybody, it's yeah, a privilege to be here, and thanks for having Beth and I. I'm proud, so I get emotional hearing a story because you hear different things come out each time. But I guess the reason that we are both here is because being a student nurse, and I've been a nurse for 33 years, so my specialty was neuroscience, ironically, and in critical care. So I can remember so many families and young people that I've nursed, and children in paediatrics following stroke, traumatic and acquired brain injury. So we felt it was a real privilege to be here today, but I'm definitely wearing my different hat as a mum. Once upon a time, I'd have sat in a room and wearing my uniform and actually sitting alongside patients and their families and having these conversations. So you do see things through another lens, and none of it comes with criticism, because we've walked the wards for years and know how challenging it is. And I think there's a lot that I would just say right now, whatever we're sharing and whatever we're saying, the systems don't support some of the things that we would love to see happen. Funding doesn't support it, skill mix, needing more amazing nurses on the wards, and we had some incredible nurses, but there is always room, I guess, for learning. So I did write down just a summary of what I actually felt at that time, because I think it's quite hard for me. I get into very much a clinical space. So I talk like a clinician rather than talking like mum, but I just put here about when it all happened. Beth's explained how terrified she was. And when I looked in her eyes when it was happening, the look of terror was in her eyes. And as a mum and dad, and she has a brother and sister who are only 12 and 14 at that time, it was extremely frightening. And as we all know, when we have our patients come in, you don't really know why, what's the cause, what's happening. So having that knowledge is a blessing and a curse, because I know so many rare and wonderful diseases and things can be happening, and anomalies. So it was emotional, it was frightening, and we were facing the unknown, and we didn't know what had caused it. You also wonder, will Beth's speech come back? Will she talk again? And when you're thinking those thoughts, when you know she's only 19, there's a long life ahead. So yeah, that was a defining moment. I think going to the hospital, the ambulance crew were amazing. So taking you through that journey, I guess, that we followed, there were some great people doing some great stuff that all made sense at the beginning. Then we get to sit in a waiting room, and that didn't make sense to me. She was a young person and we didn't know why. And it was only, we were being the polite patients, it was only when she started to lose her speech again, tell me her head was getting worse and she was frightened again, that I then approached them. So I think this was the beginning of my role, not just to be mum, but to be advocate. It involved me kind of going and asking questions. Look, she's really not great. Can you reassess her? I understand you're really busy, but she's very frightened and I'm really worried. Her speech has gone again. And they were great. They took us through. ED then continued through its process of getting Beth screened and up to a hospital bed onto the neuro ward. And then once we were on the ward, I think Beth's probably shared most of what that journey was like. I think a couple of the key takeaways for me is that if we don't ask the questions at the very beginning that give you a snapshot of a young person's life and how we talk to young people, it looks very different to looking after our older patients or children. So I think the important part of this is, those discussions about what was your life before. She was a student nurse, she was working part-time, she's got a family. They were all supportive. Our family are all overseas. We don't have any family here. So there's a lot of phone calls, there's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on making sure everyone's feeling reassured that she's okay. And then it was really just, each day we were given information, lots of assessments, lots of medicalized models of that tick box, and the nursing time was quite rare. And I think that's what Beth feels. I can honestly say there were some lovely people. They'd say good morning. You'd occasionally get a name, not always. And then you probably wouldn't see them. It was only just them for people to come and get you and take you somewhere to have something done. And the sad part for me is that I think about my nursing career, and I have sat with patients, I have sat with families, I did know their story and I did know who was important to them and what their life looked like. And I just felt no one actually asked if I was okay, and I was probably losing my mind at that point. Those are just simple questions. We didn't need very much, but I think that comfort and reassurance in those early days, and actually knowing your staff, knowing your nurses who are looking after you. She was by the side, by the nurses station, so that safety of, we've got a young person who we're not sure what's going on, but we'll keep them close, but not keeping that conversation close and personal. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest gap. And Beth's mental health, there was no discussion, and there was no conversation about whether she'd like to see someone else within that multidisciplinary team. So coming home, I think we kind of let things sit in the hospital and thought, that's okay, we'll be discharged and obviously we'll be held within a system. And then it became apparent quite quickly there was no outreach, there was no post-acute care. The assessments with the OT, who was wonderful, who held us, was really just to tick that box, you're fit and well, and you can go home. And then obviously Beth knew that she didn't have any cognitive deficits, so could return to university. And then that vocational support, that study support, relied on us having the thinking to go and speak to the uni and support her to have conversations, to take some of those things into consideration, how she'd manage that. And that's been all. And then Beth chose to fundraise for the Stroke Foundation to turn a negative into a positive. And that's how we found the Stroke Foundation and their resources, as well as the lovely clinical nurse consultant that we saw on the very last day. And I would have loved to have held on to her and known her from day one and been able to get her, you know, and Beth together to have that consultation. But the pack, I think, was given to us. And I think, again, one really important part of this and a piece of this is a pack is one thing, but sitting down and talking through that and what that actually means in all that information in there to a young person is the key. And we'll go on to talk about the Young Stroke Project, but I would love to think after this, we didn't have the Young Stroke Project then, but if you could tap onto the website, see the resources there, watch a video, hear another parent speak, for Beth hearing another young person speak, it gives hope, it gives a connection to a community, and it gives a connection to resources that even if you didn't need them at discharge, it's later down the track. Beth's definitely got a battle with fatigue. Life looks very different, headaches, managing a really busy life. And we need to know right now, how do we go to see someone if it's sleep? How do we speak to someone now 18 months on about how you manage fatigue through your life? So those are kind of the areas and gaps we felt, and peer support, maybe being able to connect with others. So that's a really long blurb of kind of where the sort of things that we saw, and maybe some of the assumptions that were made. I think there were a lot of assumptions made that if it wasn't that clinician in a room, another clinician was doing it, or you know, a lot of the doctors, you know, whoever was doing something. I think there were assumptions made that some of those conversations were being had. Not even asking about relationships. Beth was in a relationship at that time. Not asking permission while we were sat there. Beth, are you comfortable for us to have this conversation? Would you like your parents here? There was a lot of assumptions about us being in her world. So again, I think that possibly relates more to the medical teams than it does the nursing teams. But I would always chat with Beth before they have this conversation. Would you like me to be here, or would you like me to leave? Because we cover obviously a lot in that space. So I think the final point would be, if you're a clinician, and there may well be people sitting here in this room now who've looked after their families and you've been their advocate, and I think it's a very easy assumption to make that because we're nurses, physios, OTs, whoever we may be, that we'll take that role. So then clinicians feel safe that they can breathe for a while. And it's difficult. We do take that, and we want to do it, and we're there to support our loved ones. But I think it comes with a huge amount of, stepping out of the space that people need to be with their patients. And there's a whole other topic I could talk about 18 months on now, about stress and carer stress. Carer stress isn't just the older person with their husband and wife and taking on a physical and very demanding caring role. I've definitely experienced carer stress in a different way. It's not through any fault of Beth's, but it's purely because we've had a life-changing experience, and that has really impacted our life. It's impacted her sister's life, and it's impacted her brother's life. So the stress that actually you have, and the worry continues, and anxiety continues, because you don't know what the future looks like. So in Beth's eyes and our eyes, life is positive, and she's doing some incredible things, and we hope this makes a difference and shares something with you all. Our story is only one story, and on the Young Stroke Project you'll hear from many, many people all around Australia, from all walks of life, all cultures, and I think the more we can share that with all patients, it will be amazing, so that they can find someone that they relate to. So thanks so much for letting us talk, and please ask us some questions so that we know that we've hit the mark.
I think there are some questions.
Well, my goodness, it's Lizzie Dodd here.
Hi, Lizzie.
You are amazing, the pair of you. I'm sitting here, I've got the privilege that I can unmute, and I'm sitting here, and Sky will want to unmute too, because we're going to have deep thoughts about what you've said. We've been clinicians, like you are for years and years, and you are so right. How much time do we actually spend in the patient's room talking to them and going through things? And recently, I know I am the biggest offender of these things because I'm called to the next emergency, and I know what you're saying. I know what you're feeling, and you need somebody to go through things. And I am the biggest offender of, here's your pack, here's the contact details, and here's the Stroke Foundation support. And it's, sometimes it's as quick as that chat, and I'm going to change that. You have inspired me. Right.
Thanks, Lizzie. And I've been that nurse as well. I've definitely not been perfect. And I think the hardest part is the high dependency and the mix of patients on one ward. And if you've not got a post-acute setting, you haven't got a transitional care setting. If you haven't got an outreach, then there's a gap immediately. And I think sometimes that has to happen. And there may be parts around the state that don't have such a gap as WA. So it's interesting because I start to see through the Stroke Foundation, watching Sky and what Sky's doing with the golden hour and all these amazing things. I'm like, why have we not got the same in every state for best practice and continuous care? So yeah, thanks.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. I'll go on mute.
I just wanted to jump in and say thank you both so much, because I think that was one of probably our best webinars. And as Lizzie said, unfortunately, this time of day, it's dreadful for nurses. So I think that this will be one that gets watched later on. So I've popped a few questions in chat, but I'm going to take the opportunity of actually co-hosting with Lizzie to actually ask you in person, because I think that there's going to be a lot of questions that people will be thinking as they watch you, and hopefully I'm going to ask you most of them. So I think, Beth, you said that you arrived after hours?
Yeah, I think by the time I was there, it was like 11-ish, on like a Tuesday night, yeah.
Do you know if the paramedics called you through as a code stroke to the hospital?
You remember?
There was never any language like that used at all that I'm aware of. So again, after you leave the hospital, and now what I know, and reading some of this, Lizzie, as well, I mean, I'm not up to speed with some of the neurospace now, but I read something this week about that, and I was like, no, I don't remember that being
But I think
part of it.
The weird thing about that is that when I was actually sat at home when Mum was calling the ambulance, they still asked about a full stroke assessment. Like, that was the first thing that they did, and got me to say out a sentence I could not say. So I don't know whether that was lost in translation, or by the time I got in the ambulance and was there, maybe it wasn't as severe at that point that when I was sat down on the couch. So I don't think any of that was mentioned, because no one really even said the word stroke to me, even when they were sending me off for CTs and things, until it got mentioned like a day later.
I think what's interesting as well about that, Lizzie, is since Beth's stroke and now being involved with the Stroke Foundation and reading, there's so much research, there's so much treatment, there's so many trials. Not one thing was mentioned about, and I didn't think to ask at that time. I just made then that assumption: you've had a stroke, you sit, you live with it, you deal with it, you recover. But when Beth saw her scan for the first time, that was really confronting to actually be shown. But then there was no counselling or support through that. And I think I'm a bit of a passionate person about, I was working in youth mental health at that time. So ironically, I was kind of like, wow, there's lots not being touched on. And I don't know, my question still is now to this day, could Beth have had some treatment? Could there have been some options for her? Because that was never a discussion. It was a diagnosis. This is where we're at. You can go home.
Do you have any feeling then if arriving after hours negatively impacted your treatment? I can't help but wonder, we all know that our after hours times are diabolical compared to in hours. There is skeleton staff, often there's no stroke person in hospitals after hours, and you're relying on, either your ED or your general medical doctors covering. What's your thoughts? I mean, it's a bit of a crystal ball. You're not going to know for sure, but do you think that maybe if you had arrived in hours, that it may have been a different scenario?
What do you think? Because I was I was a bit out of it. But
I think Beth was seeing junior teams. We certainly wouldn't have seen anyone of a senior level. So it would be an assumption that I'd be making. But it took at least till later the next day, sorry, to go to actually see people on a round and a consultant who put a name to who they were and what they were going to be doing for Beth in investigations. But that was all.
And I picked up the fact that you said that, you know, cognitively you were fine, so you're fine to go back to uni, but did you actually get formal cognitive testing, or is that just you making the assumption that you can think straight and ergo there's not been any receptive issues or executive functioning issues?
So for me, I was sent to an OT, just standard precautions, you know, the process. And she was really good, but the tests I was doing were just saying out really simple rhyming words or moving one thing to another thing, figuring out a small problem. I had a few sessions and I'd completed all of that and I could do them all. And I was sitting there going, well, I can speak. But at that point in my mind, I was like, how am I going to write an essay? Can I sit and do an exam? At that point, and you know, even in those OT sessions, I was going, yeah, it's good. Like I'm getting the support from her and I'm ticking off all these boxes, but the boxes I were ticking off were these really, really simple tasks. And I don't know even to this day whether there's any deeper assessments, because then I went, okay, well, I can go back to uni because that's what I just need to go back to uni. For me, that was huge. And I just had to get my exams done. I had to sit and do essays and just figure it out myself. And luckily I figured it out. And you know, the thing that affected me the most was the headaches, the fatigue, and it was managing that. But yeah, I didn't know before I sat down and tried whether
I think the answer to that is yes, but again, what Beth's recall is during this time is still quite surprising to me, because now I've realized just how much she, you know, just wasn't remembering during that time, and how much of an impact the stroke had within those first 3 months, and then returning to study. I think no discussion around that mental fatigue when you're studying, working, and yeah, I would say Beth still can get chronically exhausted. She's about at a time now, I think, where uni and the waves, and she manages that herself. And also, I think they did do higher executive functioning testing with the OT, and she was comfortable at that time, but no further follow-up, 6 months, a year, you know, 2 years. I guess I have those questions now for Beth, feeling confident to go into her future. It's a good question, Sky. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask one more question before I stop hogging the limelight and hand it over to Lizzie to ask some of the other questions that have come up. But, you know, unfortunately, it sounds like you really did slip through the cracks in the hospital a lot. And it sounds like your GP in the community has been the one who's really had to trace your pathway. So, you know, considering, you know, there's a big program going on at the moment to try and educate GPs around Australia, and that's one of the initiatives that the Stroke Foundation are doing in partnership with others. But, you know, we found that there's a lot of GPs who know very little about stroke, and given your intense reliance on your GP to navigate your path, was he aware of stroke? Was he aware of young stroke? Was he kind of learning as he went, or was he a good resource for you?
So I was lucky that I found a GP, I think earlier that year, that knew me as a person before, had dealt with, you know, helping me navigate my mental health, helping me navigate physical health. And by the time it was one appointment, I was there for one thing, and then a few months later I come back and I was like, had to explain to her, I've had this stroke and I don't really know where to go. And I think at that point she was just going through the discharge notes. She was, you know, researching some things on the spot when I was there. And yeah, I think it really was, she has been amazing, and she's very thorough, and she wanted to understand every detail of it. And I felt very, very safe and comfortable with her kind of leading my care, because at that point, no one had really taken control. And she did. And I was very grateful. I still am for her. But like you said, she hadn't dealt with anyone that had a young stroke, like a young stroke. I don't even know if she had other people that had strokes. You know, she had to guess, Google, you know, go through and then figure out who to refer me to if I had questions, had to, you know, really just figure it out. And that was kind of shocking to, at that point in time, I was like, but in uni, stroke is an example that they use in almost every unit we do. You learn something and then you get a scenario, and stroke as a word is just chucked around to no end because it fits so many different scenarios. So I was going, if it's so common in nursing, surely the doctors all know how to deal with someone that's had a stroke. But yeah, like she's done amazingly, but yeah, it was almost like the blind leading the blind. At sometimes I would tell her how I was feeling and she'd be like, oh wow, okay, you know, like we were all learning at that point. So I think it's really important that even, you know, the GPs know more about it. It's a weird
scary.
time.
Therefore, if you had got a GP who was less engaged, that maybe you would have had a very different outcome.
I think we've spoken about that through various parts of our journey, that we got lucky. That phrase, you got lucky, like we got lucky with a great OT that held Beth for a bit longer than she should have done. You know, it shouldn't be about luck. And then we're not in rural and remote, so we say, well, we're in a big city, so, and Beth has family support, and we, you know, we know how to navigate a health system. And I just really, that's why we got involved with the Stroke Project, because we're like, if we find this hard, how is anyone else finding this? You know, it must be difficult, despite all the wonderful things going on around the country. It's just not consistent, that journey and that pathway.
Lizzie, I might hand back to you to host the next couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Liz O'Brien, who's a nurse practitioner in New South Wales, she loves your insights, and she's reflecting on her long and distinguished career, and, you know, the time she spent with patients. You've drawn us all up short, you know, we really want to get there. And then she goes on to say, often with younger people, there are other diagnoses, not stroke not being the first diagnosis that normally comes to mind. Now, you know, we see more and more young people with stroke, but often, especially when you although you have a PFO, a patent foramen ovale, and they're clinically associated with migraines, and often migraines can can present as stroke symptoms. And fortunately, you know, your language, and you weren't limb weakness, because that in some degree might have helped you. If you'd had a limb weakness, people would think, really, oh my goodness, stroke would have been the first thoughts in their mind. So it's you know, that makes us think we really need to do the thorough assessments and have our processes and our code stroke processes in really slick, and, you know, look at everybody thoroughly. And Liz's other question was, do you recall seeing a speech pathologist?
Yeah, from what I remember was after my speech had come back. So I think because it was only for the 15 hours, 24 hours it was before I saw someone. So by the time I did see someone, my speech had returned mostly to normal. Like I was probably still stumbling over some words. Even now when I get really, really, really tired, it probably happens a little bit more than, you know, when a normal person gets tired and stumbles over words. But yeah, I didn't see someone until 24 hours later. And by then I felt, to me, I was like, oh, well, my speech is back now. Like it, and they did a really good job. And I'm, you know, it was just the timing and things, but yeah, it was still a bit confusing for me. Because obviously the diagnosing factor for me was the brain scan. They looked and they found the bleed, and, you know, from there they could put it down to something. But I think that when I was in hospital, I was like, well, I can't talk. And I was like, that's not, like, what is that from? And you kind of, I think Mum would know more about this time than me.
I think maybe that's an education gap as well. And I've noticed this with each of my children as they've grown up. When they can't understand why something's happened and given the explanation. So Beth being told there's a parietal bleed, but not really understanding, even though she's studying, again, maybe assumptions, that being in that part of that brain, what does it mean? What should I look out for even in the future? You know, headaches are one thing, fatigue is another. But when Beth is really tired, she'll use completely the wrong words for stuff. And we joke and laugh and say, is it too soon? But, you know, I think that is that worry, you know, is that always going to be that way? Is it when I'm tired? So
there's not really a way to assess it. I think almost like I'm a year and a half on and we've just come to that conclusion. Like I've just noticed it, and we've noticed it because my family see me when I'm super, super tired, but there's no way to kind of have that definitive answer of like, why do I do this still? Is there still something wrong with my brain, or is it still my body recovering? And after I left the hospital, I pretty much didn't see my neuro team. The heart team fixed up my heart, and
I think that might be the key as well. The key to all of this is re-entry. And so once you're discharged, it's like, well, what on earth do you do next? So I think that's an important insight, I guess, for us all to ask those questions, because we do rely on then the GP again, and you have to go back. If you're held in a transition or an outreach type program, that you know, maybe they can hold you as cases, whatever it needs to be, but know that you can come back until a longer period of time, because that there's probably questions now or a check-in, and it's a reassurance you're actually good. Everything we found at those first assessments, we're really comfortable, you're doing really well, or which are the biggest challenges now? And all Beth's, and that's the language we use, is it's hidden challenges. She doesn't have a physical deficit, she doesn't fit NDIS, she doesn't have those other aspects that usually trigger all of those services and supports.
Maybe now is a good time to introduce the Stroke Foundation with their few slides to just let us all know about their Young Stroke project. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
And Stacey will put up those slides. Thank you, Stacey.
Thanks, Stacey. And Nicola and Beth, feel free to jump in at any stage, because you guys obviously know the project as well as I do. Nicola and Beth have just been integral in our Young Stroke project, and we thought it was a good opportunity to let you all know about the project as well. Basically, the project is designed to meet the really unique needs of younger stroke survivors, and we talk about younger stroke survivors being aged 18 to 65. So it's a big group that we're talking about, and obviously within that there'll be a lot of subsets. We know that there are huge gaps in terms of the information and in terms of support that's tailored for younger stroke survivors. And as Beth was pointing out earlier, the My Stroke journey, we know it's not fitting the needs of younger stroke survivors well at the moment. So there's clearly that need for some tailored resources. And it's a really exciting opportunity to look at how these new resources can build on our Enable Me platform, and also making sure that we're promoting our services like Strokeline as much as possible. So people like Nicola and Beth know it's there. People will interact with our services at all different points along the line. It might be early on in their journey, it might be later down the track. But we're really keen to make sure that people have that information early on so that they can access it when and how they want to. So it's quite a big project. And Stacey, I might get you to jump to the next slide if you can. One of the really exciting things about the project is that it is under a co-design model, and that's where people like Nicola and Beth come in, and we are just absolutely thrilled to have them involved in the project. So the project is very much looking at how we can involve people with lived experience and family members in all aspects of the project. So really looking at involvement in governance, in design and development of our resources, and then I guess being ambassadors for the resources as well. We also have Saran, who is one of our project coordinators on the project team, and Saran brings lived experience to the project team. And Saran, I'm not sure if you're there. Saran's in between physio appointments. She's in the thick of her therapy still from her stroke. But Saran, did you want to say a couple of words about your role on the project?
Sure. Yeah, and this webinar is great, by the way, and thank you for inviting us. And Beth and Nicola, of course, always your story and what you share is valuable information. And I suppose that's sort of where I come in with the project. in that I suppose having that lived experience is you know, we each have our own story, and every stroke is, as you all know, is completely different. Being able to have that lived experience within the project, but also being able to, you know, engage with everyone, one on our lived experience working group, but also, you know, everyone that wants to get involved. People want to be heard. And I think that's sort of the biggest thing with this project is, you know, we started off thinking that there was going to be delivering resources and, you know, and services and support in regard to Strokeline and promoting that. But I think a lot of people just want to be heard and engage with people, because, you know, it's, I guess, you know, having a stroke at a young age is so isolating and disempowering, and ideally this project will actually sort of help people along their journey, even if it's a little bit. We hope that, you know, sort of by the end of the project, people can actually sort of say, yeah, I was involved in that, and from our perspective, I think that will be a success.
Thanks, Saran. That's well put. I might get you to jump to the last slide, Stacey. This just gives you a snapshot of our Young Stroke Project website, some of the resources that are available. But I'd really strongly encourage you to have a bit of a look around the website. The website's up there, youngStrokeProject.org.au. It's a great website to let any stroke survivors or family members, friends of people who are coming through the wards, to let them know about the website, and they can actually go on there, they can register their interest to be involved in the project, and it's sort of a choose your own adventure, so people can be involved as little or as much as they like in the project in terms of developing resources. And as health professionals, you can get involved as well, so we would love you to register your interest on the project as well. You can just go to the Get Involved section of the website. And if you've got any questions, feedback, any thoughts at any stage, get in touch with us. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. Young Stroke Project at strokefoundation.org.au. We really want as many people involved as possible because everyone brings something a little bit different to the project. And Nicola, and Beth, I might hand back over to you guys to wrap us up, and any last thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think after all the things that we've talked about today, I would say to end on an absolute positive note, being involved in the Young Stroke Project, I've become a bit of an advocate for co-design, lived experience, and ambassadors for the Stroke Foundation. So I'd encourage anybody to come along, and I sit in a privileged position because I'm probably one of the only parents on the working group and steering committee at the moment, but I'd love to see more people come along and join me, and if not, share their experiences, and just know that we're there. Nurses carry their phones around with them day in, day out. It's such a quick thing to click on and just show the family, even if, you know, someone's tired, they're sleeping, and just a 2 minutes, because that could make the difference of just saying, okay, this is available to me. It's not a paper package. It's very much virtual. We live in that virtual world now. So I think that's the positive about the Young Stroke Project, the Stroke Foundation website. And I really didn't know about Strokeline, which is silly because I should. I know about Lifeline, I know about all the mental health supports out there, but I didn't see Strokeline in the same way for us, but most importantly for Beth. So I wish I'd tapped into that sooner, to ask some of the questions that I tried to do on my own. And I think it's one of those things, you don't have to do it on your own, and there is support out there, and you can burn out very quickly, and the stress kicks in very quickly after a life-changing event for the young stroke person and their families, friends, and colleagues and work colleagues. I haven't even touched on going back to work and having that conversation. So I think the more we all have a conversation about stroke and young stroke, the better world it will be. So thanks so much for today, and I'm proud of you, Beth. because I wouldn't be here without Beth. She wanted me to do it with her. So it's been a good experience, and we hope we're making a difference. That's all that matters. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that like having the opportunity to do this has been something that I've really been wanting to do for a while. And, you know, being able to, if I can just get one nurse to talk to one person a little bit more than they would have before, then that's enough for me. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I feel like I've probably missed things or dragged on a bit, but yeah, thank you for giving us this chance to kind of share a bit
And
more.
any questions? I'm on LinkedIn, Lizzie, and Sky, I know you know, and you know, we can be contacted through the Stroke Foundation. So even if anyone wants to reach out, we would love to talk to people if they think it would help. And on a one-to-one, sometimes we prefer to ask questions. So however you want to do that, certainly through the Young Stroke Project and the team there. And yeah, feel free. We'd like to help.
Well, thank you very much. It's been enlightening and full of questions. There are thousands more questions which we should link into. Sky, did you want to add anything more?
No, just thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been a privilege to meet both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed. And all I can say, Beth, is that you have to get into stroke when you've qualified. There is no question.
Yes, definitely.
Beth's following her dreams. She's about to go. She's going rural and remote to Broome, so she's about to try and take young stroke to the other parts of WA.
Fabulous, fabulous. And remember, Adelaide is only just a hop away.
Yes, definitely.
Come here. All the best to you both, and thank you very much. And Catherine and Stacey for our support there. Okay, we'll catch you both soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks to the rest of the people for tuning in to ASNEN, and don't forget you'll be able to see this again on the ASNEN website. It's there, run by nurses for nurses, so use it. Thank you all. Bye bye for now.